Hello, fellow followers. Welcome back to FanZcene. Greg here, and today I have for you finally my review of In Search of Darkness, 1990 to 1994. It took me a little longer to get to this than I anticipated. I was hoping to have this review out months ago, but I finally got to it. It's over 6 hours long. I got the Blu-ray here. Finally got the Blu-ray in the mail as well too. I absolutely got to say I love these documentaries, the In Search of Darkness documentaries from the 80s, the three that they did. And it was interesting to know that they were going to do the 90s, and it's going from 1990 to 1994 in this one. So like the first half of the 90s, which was a very transitional portion, and for horror and movies and entertainment in general from the 80s. And I gotta say, I really did it. I dug this one. This one was great. It's so good. I'm gonna show off the Blu-ray and stuff real quick, and then I'll get into it because I have my thoughts. I'm gonna give you my thoughts, but I'm gonna show off the Blu-ray real quick. Here's the front. I love the artwork, all the great 90s aesthetics there. Here's the back of it, and then we'll open it up and I'll show you the the Blu-ray here in general, that with this artwork here in the back. Some great additions to this one. And then we got the inside, we got the disc and everything. And it does have a pop-up disc. It does have a reversible cover. If you can see it, it's just what's on the box there. And then it has this great booklet here with insights and stuff like that into the films and stuff like that. And what's really great, it's got the watch list. So like, I guarantee you, when you watch these In Search of Darkness movies, you will discover movies you've never heard of, movies you've forgotten about, movies that you've only seen once and maybe want to retry. And they give you the entire list of movies they mentioned in these series and these booklets like this, so you can go through them and check them off one by one, watch them to do your watch list. So that's a great little thing to have that I love that they do with these series, and that. So now let's get into what I thought about this documentary, because I'm a huge fan of the 80s horror movies. That's probably my favorite decade of horror, but I also really do love a lot of movies that came out in the 90s, and they really go over, like I mentioned, it was a transitional era. So they talk about how like Chucky and Freddy and Jason and them were sort of still hanging on, and Michael Myers was still sort of hanging on into the 90s, and but they were starting to slow off, and people were starting to create different things, and they didn't quite, it was a growing period for horror movies in the 90s. Like the studios didn't really, yeah, I've always sort of looked down on horror, and it got worse sort of in the 90s. But also they discovered that as long as they changed the name of a horror movie to make it say it was a thriller or psychological thriller or something, which they discuss a lot, which I really dug that, where they talk about what is in the name of a horror movie. Is it a horror movie, a psychological thriller? What can be horror? And I think all of it can generally be horror, but like, they're saying that once you label something, it really shouldn't be labeled. But I do like that, and I do love a lot of stuff they covered in this. I love that they gave some love to the full moon movies, Meridian, which I absolutely love. Meridian. If you've never seen Meridian, I should do a review on that someday. With Sherilyn Fenn from Twin Peaks, gorgeous lady, and Charlie, her name was Charlie in the 90s. She's a gorgeous lady as well too. It's a very Beauty and Beast story. Love that they talk about Puppet Master 3. They talk about the subspecies movies. If you're looking for a great vampire movie, watch the subspecies movies from Full Moon. I love that they paid tribute to that. I love that they talked about Freddy's Dead and the Child's Play movies. I love that they talked about New Nightmare. Wes Craven's New Nightmare is one of my all-time favorite Freddy movies. It ushered in a genre of meta, which they talk about that in this as well too. How the 90s were becoming very self-aware, and we leave off in 1994. So of course we know in 1996 Scream came along and changed the game, but we'll get to that when they get to the second documentary, 1995 to 1999. But I really love this, and then once again it goes through 1990 to 1994. They cover a lot of movies in this, from like the home video emergence of movies, you like the straight to video movies, the do it yourself movies, which were still going strong, and then how like celebrities, like big time celebrities and directors, got into movies, like with Dracula and Interview with a Vampire, and like how horror started to become a little smarter. To me, though, I will be honest with you, I'm not into that whole like where they talk about how horror becoming smarter and trying to set this up. I think sometimes people get a little full of themselves, or trying to act like horror. Some of their movies are smarter than they are, and some of the ones that they think are dumb are actually smarter than the smarter ones. That's just my opinion. But they get into all that, and they get into like horror on TV, and I love that they covered like the X-Files, and the Crypt Keeper. I'm sorry, I escaped my head there for Tales from the Crypt and Tales from the Crypt Keeper, the TV cartoon, and Are You Afraid of the Dark, which I loved growing up. Are You Afraid of the Dark and the Goosebumps series, and how there was horror on television like Angel, Buffy, all those. That was a great little segment they covered in this that I really enjoyed, and it also talks about the emergence of CG. Like, do you guys remember the '90s CG? Oh my god, the '90s CG was so bad, but it's so fun to watch now. It's almost, it did, it did take away a lot from the practical effects in today's day and age, but not back then because they were still using practical effects. What CG did eventually into movies, but it was like there's something cheesy and funny about looking back on that CG that makes those movies seem so much funner or so much grandiose or whatever. So it talked about that, and it talked about so many great things, so many great movies that I really really loved, and it took me back. I mean, what these documentaries do, they often take me back to a time in my life when I was a kid and when I was seeing movies like this. Sometimes I was seeing boobs before I should be seeing boobs. Sometimes I was seeing people ripped apart before should be seeing people ripped apart. Sometimes I was seeing something that just like I knew was something special, so something entertaining, even if it frightened me. And like I love that's what these movies do to me. And some, like I mentioned, you will find movies you've never seen before. You will find movies that maybe you saw once and you vaguely remember. You will find movies that you have seen before that maybe you haven't seen in a long time that you really want to get to. So this was really really great. Yeah, some of the movies may not be as good as the movies from the '80s, but there was some really great stuff in the '90s that really, you know, you look back on it now and you think about the '90s, and like the horror may not have been as prevalent as it was in the '80s, but it was still there. And maybe they hid the name, the executives, the studios hid the name of horror, but you were watching horror and you didn't realize it. And maybe you didn't realize that what you thought was bad at the time is actually good, right? And maybe, because a lot of people, the '90s are looked at as like the lost decade of horror, where, oh, nothing good came out for horror in the '90s. Well, technically, yeah, they did, but you were probably just so used to like mainstream wise, looking at for like the Freddys and the Jasons and stuff like that, when it was really changing and it was so much more than just like what's in the name of a horror movie. Horror transformed for better or worse. In some cases, I believe, in some cases worse, but in some cases great. Like, which I'm looking forward to, like the '95 to '99, because I feel like that's when like Scream came in, which I loved, which I'll get to that, which I love, but also I feel like horror became something different that not quite my cup of tea, but it's still very interesting to hear what they have to say about it. And as far as the new talking heads in this, I loved listening to Mike Flanagan. Please, more Mike Flanagan. He was an amazing talking head in this. Also, I loved listening to Frank Henenlotter, Frankenhooker Basket Case. I love listening to him. Shout out to Adam Marcus, who I've had on my channel talking about Jason Goes to Hell. That was great to see him in this documentary. And Heather Langenkamp, I love hearing her stories on the Nightmare on Elm Street movies and everything. And it was great to hear, like, once again, about Wes Craven's New Nightmare. But yeah, there you guys have it. There's my review of In Search of Darkness, 1990 to 1994. Highly recommend if you can get your hand on it. I do believe they're still having a flash sale till February 18th, 2025 in the making of this video. I think I still have a link. I'll put it down below if you guys want to go buy it. So your last chance to get this on Blu-ray. So I have it, and I'm so glad to have this along with my '80s collection, which I really need the case for this because I don't have the box case for this. But for part one, the first one '80s, and the second one In Search of Darkness Part 2 '80s, and then of course In Search of Darkness Part 3 '80s. And I'm so glad to have all three of these along with the '90s. But let me know what you guys thought about this review. If you've seen this, if you got your copy, in the comments section down below, what are some of your favorite movies from the '90s? What's some of your favorite gateway horror, which they covered in this, from the '90s? Leave all that in the comments section down below. And if you like what you saw here, maybe consider hitting that like button or subscribing and hitting that bell for notifications. That would be awesome if I earn your guys' subscriptions. Possibly share the video out for everybody to see. Please share the video out for everybody to see. Or maybe join and become a channel member, because that would help out my channel immensely. Thank you, and shout out to all my channel members. I appreciate each and every one of you guys. Thank you guys for being channel members here and for all of your support. And to everybody watching, whether you like me, hated me, or like this video, or hate this video, I thank you for sticking this long. Wherever you all are, please have a great, safe, happy, healthy day, morning, afternoon, evening, and night. Always support physical media, because it really truly is the superior format. Godspeed and keep it horror.